If you're looking for that Ankara style that can pass for both a blouse and a jacket at the same time, then this tutorial is for you. Hello, my name is Ayomide, and on this channel I post sewing tutorials and pattern drafting tutorials. In this tutorial, I'm going to be sharing how I made this Ankara blouse that can also pass for a jacket. It has a front zipper, side flare by the waistline, and this beautiful well-structured sleeve. It gives you the boss look. If you want to learn how to do this, you should see this video up until the very end, and if you haven't subscribed, kindly click on the subscribe button and let's jump straight ahead into this tutorial. For this project, I've got my Ankara fabric and I use about 1.5 yards for this blouse. I also intended on using this mesh for the sleeve, but I ended up changing my mind to the structured sleeve I showed us earlier before this came up. I've also got my pattern for both the front and the back, and the pattern runs from my shoulder up until the hip line. So this is what we call the full scale bodice. To move on with the pattern alteration, I have my 1-inch zipper allowance. Remember, there's going to be a zipper in the front, but there is no zipper at the back. The first thing I will do is to determine my neck width, and I'm using 3.5 inches for the neck width. For the neck depth, I'm going to be using 6.5 inches, and I'm going to be drawing a V neckline. I would also extend the neckline to the zipper allowance. Once that is done, I would move on to my underbust contouring, and to do that I would take some inches away from my dart that I had already drawn. Another alternative is for you to place your underbust measurements there, measure any excess and use that excess to do your underbust contouring. I'm just going over to use my hand to draw the shape of the underbust. Once that is done, I'm going to be getting the midpoint of my shoulder slant, and that was about 2.4 inches, 2.2 inches thereabout, and I'll connect that point to the bust point. And that will be all for the front. Moving over to the back, the first thing I would do is to alter my neck width to 3.5 inches, which was what I used for the front. Once that is done, I would also get the midpoint of my shoulder slant, just like I did for the front also, because we want our shoulder seam to match up. So I'm just going over to get the midpoint, and once that is done, I would connect it to my back dart. This region of the center back would be taken out. I took in 1 inch for my back tightening in order to eliminate any bulge. If you have been consistent with my tutorial, you should be familiar with this and the importance of doing your back tightening. Before cutting out my pattern, I would go over and mark in my bust dart, which is 1 inch, and once that is done, I will then go over and trim off my pattern before we get to do the alteration at the side. These are my pattern sets, guys. This is what I have after cutting. I have my center front, side back, and center back. The next thing would be to draw the shape at the side. To do that, I would make sure my patterns are aligned at the waist, making sure my waistline aligns together, after which I will pick up my tape and measure 2.5 inches downward from the side front pattern. Once that is done, I will mark 1 inch away from the center front pattern. After that, I would use my marker pen to create my desired curve, which I would smoothen with my pattern master. I'm going to be repeating likewise for the back also. Bring my patterns together, make sure that they align at the waistline. After that, I'm going to be marking 2.5 inches downward, 1 inch away from the center back. Use my marker to create my desired curve, which I'm going to be trimming off once I'm through. Guys, I'm done trimming of my pattern and this is what I have. I will then proceed to cut on my lining and also on my fabric. I'm done cutting on my fabric and also on my lining, and here are all of my pattern pieces. The next thing I want to work on is the flare at the waistline. To do that, I'm going to be measuring all around the curve. So I'm measuring the center back. I'll proceed to measure around my side front also, which is the next pattern I have, excluding the seam allowances that I added. I'm also measuring the side back, and I will also measure the center front. Another alternative is to measure this before you cut on your fabric. Once I'm done, I'm going to be adding an extra allowance of about 12 inches because I want to be able to pleat the flare for more structure. After that, I'm going to be dividing by 3 because I'm cutting half circle. And my total measurement after dividing was, after adding the extra allowance, was 30. 30 divided by 3 is 10, which is what I'm marking as my radius. I'm also going to be taking 6 inches for the length in addition to the necessary seam allowance I need for this flare. Once I'm done marking, I will then proceed to cut out my flare. So guys, I have my flare right here, and the style I envision is for the flare to be high-low, meaning they won't be of equal length. From the open-ended area of the flare, I'm marking 2.5 inches, and I'm going to smoothen it to the area where I have the fold, which is automatically the midpoint of the flare, and I'll cut it out. This makes the flare high-low, meaning the middle part is higher, and the middle part has a longer length while the end has a shorter length. This is how I'm going to be cutting my flare. I'm going to be cutting on another piece of fabric, and I will duplicate it on my lining. To move on with sewing, I've gone ahead to pin my center front to side front together, and I've also ironed in interfacing around the bust area for structure, and I'll just proceed to my sewing machine and stitch them all together, attach the center front to the side front. I will do this for the both pieces of my front area. I have also pinned down my back pieces together, the 2 pieces of my center back and this side back also together. I've got my lining here, my lining pieces for the front, and I also have the one for the back too. So I'm just going to proceed to my sewing machine. I'm done stitching the center front to the side front together, and I've also ironed open my seam lines. The next thing would be to attach a zipper. Any zipper you're using, make sure it is open-ended. Okay, now to attach this zipper, I'm going to be marking 1/2 inch away from the end of my blouse or the end of my center front. I would pin it along my seam allowance for the zipper allowance. What I added was 1 inch, and I pinned along the zipper allowance which I added. Once I'm done, I would equally pin my the other part of my front, and here is what I have. What I'll go ahead and do is to proceed to my sewing machine and sew this all the way down. I'm done sewing, and here's what I have. Here's my zipper. The next thing I will do is to join the back and the front together. To do that, I'm going to be placing my back pattern on the front, making sure right sides faces each other, and then I would sew in by the seam allowance which I added along the side and also along the shoulder. I would repeat likewise for my lining also. I'm done sewing, and here's what I have. This is what my main fabric looks like, and I've also done likewise for my lining, and this is what the lining looks like also. The next thing I will do is to work on the flare, and to do that I have also gone ahead to finish off the raw edges of the flare with my lining. I have also secured the open ends of the flare, and I've joined the flare together along the part where I'm going to be attaching to my fabric. I've joined both flare, the main fabric, and the lining together, so it becomes one piece of fabric, and it becomes very easy to work with when I want to attach to my blouse. Now, in order to attach to my blouse, the very first thing I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to be getting the midpoint of my flare, and I'll just do that by folding the flare over and then using my scissors to create a notch. Once that is done, I will locate where I have the side seam on my blouse. That is where I joined both the front and the back together, and I'm going to be pinning the midpoint of the flare to that side seam. Once that is done, I would pick one end of the flare and pin it to one end of the curve that I have on the blouse, making sure I pin it 0.5 inch away from the end of the blouse, just like I did for the zipper, and also try and make sure that the beginning part of the zipper and the flare both aligns. I would pick the other end of the flare and match it up to the end of my center back, making sure it is half an inch away from the end of the center back. I will just use my pin to place it down. Once I'm done pinning all of the crucial points, because of the extra allowance I added, I would need to pleat. So what I will do is to create my desired pleat how I want it with my pins, which is what I'm going over to do. And once I'm done, I'll go ahead and stitch this down. You would want to make sure that whatever you create on one side of the blouse is also similar to what you have on the other side of the blouse. Once I'm through placing my pleats the way I want it to be, I will go over to my sewing machine and stitch it down. I will repeat likewise for the other side of my blouse too. I'm done stitching it down, and this is what I have. The next process would be to turn the blouse with the lining, and to do that I would want to make sure that my flare is placed this way, in such a way that it is facing the right side of the fabric. I'll pick up my lining, making sure I place right sides against each other. I'm going over to pin the center back first of all, after which I would also attach the lining to the side front, making sure that the flare is inward and the zipper is also well placed. I would use my pin to pin this down. Afterwards, I will also go over to the side seam, making sure the side seam of the lining matches very appropriate to the side seam of the fabric. I would also repeat likewise for the other side of my blouse too. Once I'm through pinning the lower part of the blouse, I would move on to the upper part of the blouse, making sure that the shoulder seams are matching up and the necklines are also matching up. I will then proceed to my sewing machine and start sewing all the way around where I have my lining. So I'm going to be using my lining to turn the entire part of this blouse. So once I'm done sewing the lower part, I would also take it through the zipper. While sewing the zipper, you would want to make sure that your zipper is in between the fabric and the lining, meaning it is sandwiched between the fabric and the lining. I'll sew it all the way down, and I would also stitch my neckline also. Guys, I'm done stitching as I illustrated. This is the down part of my blouse. This is the neckline. You can see I stitched the entire neckline and the zipper area, the neckline all the way from the front to the back. I'm going over to cut off the excess zipper so that it doesn't become a nuisance to me when I get to wear this blouse later on. The only part that is open-ended is the sleeve area, that is the armhole area, and that is where I'm going to be bringing out my blouse from. You would want to make sure that you bring out every corner of this blouse. If need be for you to iron, please kindly go ahead and iron your blouse. This is what I have. You can see my zipper area, and this is the other part of my blouse. You can see why it's very important for you to leave half an inch before you sew in your zipper and also your flare. It makes turning the blouse with your lining very easy. I would go over and iron my neckline so that the lining can stay smoothly and inward just the way it should be. For the sleeve, I changed my mind because ever since I made this sleeve, I've fallen in love with it. I have a detailed tutorial on my YouTube channel on how I made this sleeve. The title of the tutorial is how to make a curved sleeve. I'm going to be putting a link in the description box, so just go over and watch it. I intend not to do a repetition since I already have a tutorial on that. What I'll go ahead and do is to fix my sleeve to my blouse, and that will be the end of this tutorial. So guys, this is my blouse, and I absolutely love the outcome. I love the versatility of this style. It can be worn as a jacket. It can also be worn as a blouse. If you found this tutorial helpful, please click on the like button. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, it is just your one way of supporting what I put out there. Kindly click on the subscribe button below. If you belong to any sewing community, feel free to share my content to your sewing community as long as you do not sell my content. Thank you so much guys for sticking till the very end, and until my next video, make sure you have a wonderful day. Goodbye.